New Mexico, 1876. The first snowflakes of autumn danced on the wind like scattered feathers as Mabel Donavan pulled her worn wool shawl tighter around her shoulders. 3 months a widow, and already the mountain winter was threatening to claim what little remained of her life. From the doorway of her small cabin, she watched the grey clouds rolling over the Sangre de Cristo mountains, bringing with them the promise of a brutal season ahead. "Mama, the fire's getting low," came a small voice behind her. Mabel turned to her 6-year-old daughter, Emma, whose delicate face was framed by untamed copper curls that matched her own. The child clutched a ragged doll to her chest, eyes wide with a wisdom no child should possess. "I know, sweetheart, I'll fetch more wood." Mabel forced a smile, though the ache in her back from yesterday's labor made the prospect of chopping more firewood nearly unbearable. They had barely enough supplies to last until December, let alone the entire winter. The roof leaked in 3 places, the cattle were thin, and the nearest neighbor was a half-day's ride away. Thomas had died suddenly, kicked in the head by the mare he'd been breaking, leaving her alone with a child, a failing homestead, and his whispered promise that they would make it in this wild territory. Pride was all she had left. Pride and Emma. "Stay inside where it's warm," Mabel instructed, grabbing the axe from beside the door. "I won't be long." The wind bit through her clothes as she trudged toward the woodpile. Her hands, once soft from her previous life in Boston, were now calloused and raw. She'd been the daughter of a shopkeeper, educated and refined, before Thomas had swept her away with promises of adventure and land of their own. Now she was just another widow in a territory that devoured the unprepared. Mabel raised the axe, ignoring the protest of her muscles, when a movement at the edge of the Pinon forest caught her eye. She froze, axe held high. 3 men on horseback emerged from the trees, moving toward her cabin with deliberate slowness. Their dark hair hung in braids, their faces weathered by sun and wind. Apache. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she lowered the axe, gripping it tightly. The settlers in town spoke of Apache raids in hushed, fearful tones. Though Mabel had never encountered any herself, Thomas had maintained they kept to themselves unless provoked, but Thomas was gone now. The lead rider raised his hand in a gesture of peace as they approached. He was taller than the others, with broad shoulders and obsidian eyes that seemed to pierce through her from beneath the red band tied around his forehead. Unlike the others, he wore a mixture of traditional clothing and what appeared to be a cavalry jacket, perhaps taken from a soldier, though it showed no signs of violence. "You do not need to fear us," he called out, his English clear and deep, carrying across the cold air. "I am Nita. We have watched you struggle alone these past weeks." Mabel's knuckles whitened around the axe handle. "I'm not alone," she lied. "My husband will return soon with supplies." A ghost of a smile touched Nita's lips. "Your husband lies beneath the earth behind your barn. I helped your neighbor Johnson bury him when the mare killed him." The bluntness of his words struck her like a physical blow. Old man Johnson had indeed helped with Thomas's burial, but she hadn't known an Apache had been present. The thought that this man had been watching her, had known of her vulnerability all this time, sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the snow. "What do you want?" she demanded, raising the axe slightly. Nita dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime on horseback. He stood a respectful distance away, hands visible. "Winter comes early to these mountains," he said, his gaze drifting to her leaking roof. "Your home will not survive the first heavy snow. The beams need strengthening." His eyes moved to her meager woodpile. "And you have not enough wood to keep warm past the first frost." "I can manage my own affairs," Mabel replied sharply, though the truth of his words stung. "Pride will not keep your child warm," Nita responded, his voice neither mocking nor cruel, merely stating fact. "We offer help with your roof and wood for your fire. The winter will be harsh this year, the signs are clear. And what would you want in return?" Suspicion edged her words. She'd heard enough stories of white women taken by natives to know that charity rarely came without a price. Something flashed in Nita's eyes, perhaps amusement, perhaps respect. "We ask nothing. My people winter in the valley beyond the ridge. We have watched you work until your hands bleed while your child grows thinner. This is not our way." Emma appeared in the doorway then, curious about the visitors. "Mama?" she called, her small voice carrying in the stillness. Mabel's protective instinct flared. "Go back inside, Emma." The child hesitated, her eyes fixed on the visitors with more curiosity than fear. Nita's expression softened as he looked at the girl. From his saddlebag, he withdrew something small and handed it to one of his companions, who approached slowly and placed it on a stump halfway between them before retreating. "For the child," Nita said. "A carving of a horse, like the one my father made for me when I was no bigger than she." Mabel stood frozen between fear and desperate need. The roof wouldn't last and the woodpile was pitiful. If they survived until spring, it would be a miracle. And yet, accepting help from these men felt like admitting defeat, like betraying Thomas's dream that they could make it on their own. "I don't need your charity," she finally said, the words sharp as the coming frost. "Please leave us be." For a long moment, Nita regarded her, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he smiled, a smile that contained both amusement and something darker, something that made her breath catch. "As you wish," he said with a slight inclination of his head. He mounted his horse again and turned to go, but paused to add, "When you change your mind, build a fire outside your cabin at dusk. We will see it." "I won't change my mind," Mabel called after him, the wind whipping her words away. Nita looked back over his shoulder, his eyes meeting hers with unsettling intensity. "Winter is long, Mabel Donavan," he said, her name strange and somehow intimate on his tongue, "and pride burns quickly in a cold hearth." With that, he and his companions rode away, leaving only hoofprints in the light dusting of snow. Mabel stood watching until they disappeared among the trees, the axe heavy in her hands, her heart beating a strange rhythm she couldn't quite understand. Only when they were gone did she notice that Emma had retrieved the carved horse from the stump and was clutching it alongside her doll, her eyes wide with wonder. "It looks like Daddy's horse," the girl whispered. Mabel felt tears threatening and quickly blinked them away. "Come inside now," she said gently. "The cold is settling in." As they turned back toward the cabin, Mabel cast one final glance at the tree line where the Apache had vanished. Despite the chill, something warm and uneasy had kindled in her chest, a feeling she wasn't ready to name or acknowledge. The first true snow began to fall that night, and as Mabel lay awake, listening to the wind howling through the gaps in the roof, she wondered how long her pride would indeed keep them warm. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Mabel worked from dawn until dusk, patching the roof as best she could, hunting small game when she could find it, and rationing their dwindling supplies with increasing desperation. A week after the Apache's visit, she awoke to find a neat stack of split firewood piled against the north wall of the cabin, enough to last 2 weeks at least. There were no footprints in the fresh snow, no sign of who had left it during the night. 2 days later, the chicken coop that had been listing dangerously to one side was mysteriously straightened and reinforced. Each time Mabel searched the tree line, half expecting to see Nita watching her, but she saw nothing except the endless white landscape and the dark fringe of pines. Yet she felt his presence, a shadow just beyond her vision, a guardian she hadn't asked for, but whose help she couldn't deny was saving their lives. Pride warred with gratitude, stubbornness with practicality. She hadn't built the signal fire he'd mentioned, yet help came anyway. It was a dangerous game they played, he offering aid without request, she accepting it without acknowledgement. Until the morning she found wolf tracks circling their cabin, coming close to the door before veering away, driven off by other tracks she recognized as moccasined feet. That night, as Emma slept, Mabel finally stepped outside in the bitter cold and built a small fire in the yard. She didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, Nita emerged from the darkness alone, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He stopped on the other side of the fire, its light casting dancing shadows across the plains of his face. "The wolves are hungry this winter," he said by way of greeting. Mabel nodded, pulling her shawl tighter. "Thank you for the wolves and the wood and the coop. You are welcome." He remained standing, respectful of the boundary she'd set. "Why?" she asked, the question that had been burning inside her finally escaping. "Why help us?" Nita was silent for a long moment, watching the flames. "I knew your husband," he finally said. "He was fair to my people when others were not. When the soldiers came searching for those they claimed had stolen cattle, he spoke the truth, that it was white rustlers who had taken them, not Apache." Mabel felt a surge of surprise. Thomas had never mentioned this. "He never told me. He was a private man, but a good one." Nita's eyes met hers across the fire. "And I have watched you fight to honor his memory by keeping this place alive. It is admirable." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "I'm not sure how admirable foolishness is," she admitted, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Sometimes I think I should sell what I can and take Emma back east." "Is that what you want?" The question hung between them, honest and probing. Mabel considered it, surprised to find the answer rising easily to her lips. "No, this is our home now. Hard as it is, I love this land." She looked up at the vast, star-filled sky. "I've never seen stars like these in Boston. Never felt so free." Nita nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then we will help you survive until spring, when things will be easier." "I can't pay you," she said. "I have not asked for payment." "Then what do you want?" The question came softly, laden with meaning she wasn't entirely sure she intended. His gaze intensified, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. For now, only to help. The unspoken "for now" lingered between them like a promise or a warning. "The roof still leaks," she found herself saying. "I've tried to patch it, but I will come tomorrow with my men," he said. "We will fix it properly before the next storm." Mabel should have felt relief, but instead a strange anticipation fluttered in her stomach. "Thank you," she said simply. As Nita turned to leave, she called out impulsively, "You could stay, for coffee. It's too cold to ride back tonight." He paused, considering her offer, then shook his head slightly. "Not yet," he said, his words carrying a weight that made her breath catch. "But soon." With that, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving Mabel standing by the fire, wondering what exactly she had just set in motion, and why the thought of seeing him again tomorrow made her heart race in a way it hadn't since Thomas had first courted her years ago. Inside the cabin, she checked on Emma, who slept peacefully clutching the carved horse. For the first time since Thomas's death, Mabel felt the faintest stirring of hope. They might survive this winter, after all. And if that survival came with complications she wasn't ready to face, well, that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight she would simply be grateful for the promise of a roof that didn't leak. True to his word, Nita arrived the next morning with 4 men. They worked efficiently, replacing damaged beams, sealing gaps and reinforcing weak points in the roof structure. Mabel watched from below, handing up tools and materials when requested, struck by the fluid coordination of their movements. Emma observed everything with wide-eyed fascination, particularly Nita, who occasionally paused in his work to smile at her or demonstrate how a particular tool worked. By midday, the child was following him like a shadow, bombarding him with questions which he answered with surprising patience. "Your daughter is curious," Nita remarked, as they shared a simple lunch of cornbread and dried venison he'd brought. Like her mother, Mabel felt herself flush slightly. "How would you know if I'm curious?" The corner of his mouth lifted. "You have been watching me all morning trying to understand who I am." Caught in her scrutiny, Mabel quickly changed the subject. "How did you learn to build like this? The roof looks better than when Thomas first constructed it." "I lived among the Spanish for 3 years as a young man," Nita explained. "I learned many of their ways, some useful, some not." Something darkened in his expression briefly before clearing. The ability to build a proper roof proved useful. His men worked through the afternoon, and by dusk the roof was complete. As they prepared to leave, snow began to fall again, fat, heavy flakes that promised significant accumulation by morning. "You should stay," Mabel found herself saying, addressing Nita, though his men stood nearby. "All of you. The storm looks bad, and it's nearly dark." The other men looked to Nita, whose expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. After a moment's consideration, he spoke to them in Apache, and they nodded, gathering their horses and leading them toward the barn. "We accept your hospitality," he said to Mabel. "My men will sleep in your barn. I will remain outside to keep watch." "Don't be ridiculous," she replied. "It's freezing. You can sleep by the fire in the cabin." His eyes held hers for a moment too long. "Are you certain?" Something in his tone made her realize the implications of her offer. A single woman inviting a man to stay under her roof, regardless of his race, would raise eyebrows. But they were miles from the nearest neighbor, and the alternative was leaving him to freeze. "I'm certain," she said firmly. "Emma and I will take the bedroom. The fire is yours." Later, after a simple dinner, and after Emma had been tucked into bed, Mabel sat across from Nita at her small table, a single candle between them. Outside, the wind howled, driving snow against the newly repaired roof that thankfully no longer leaked. "Will your men be warm enough in the barn?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "They have furs and each other's company," Nita replied. "They have endured far worse." Mabel nodded, fidgeting with her cup. 100 questions burned on her tongue, but she wasn't sure which were appropriate to ask. Finally, she settled on, "You speak English very well. My mother was mestiza, half Spanish, half Apache. She taught me Spanish and English alongside my father's language." His voice carried no inflection to indicate whether this was a source of pride or pain. "And the cavalry jacket," she ventured. A shadow crossed his face. "A reminder." "Of what?" "Of why I must live between two worlds but trust neither completely." He met her gaze directly. "The jacket belonged to a young lieutenant who once showed me kindness when others showed only hatred. He died trying to prevent a massacre of my people. I wear it to honor his memory, though many, both white and Apache, do not understand." The candlelight flickered across his features, softening the hard edges, highlighting the weariness in his eyes. For the first time, Mabel saw beyond the stoic exterior to the complexity of the man before her. Neither the noble savage of dime novels nor the merciless warrior of frontier legends, but a human being navigating a world determined to deny his humanity. "It must be difficult," she said softly, "belonging to both worlds and neither." Surprise flickered in his eyes, perhaps at her insight, perhaps at her compassion. "It is," he acknowledged, "but it allows me to help my people survive these changing times. The old ways are dying, whether we wish it or not. Do you miss them? The old ways?" His gaze turned distant. "I miss the freedom, to hunt where the game led us, to follow the seasons without borders or restrictions." A faint smile touched his lips. "But I do not miss sleeping on the cold ground quite as much as I once did." Mabel found herself smiling in return. "Well, tonight at least you have a roof and a fire." "Thanks to you." "Thanks to you," she countered. "You fixed the roof, after all." Their eyes met across the candle flame, and something shifted in the air between them. An acknowledgement of mutual respect, perhaps, or something deeper, neither was ready to name. Nita broke the moment first, rising to his feet with that same fluid grace she'd noticed before. "You should rest," he said. "Morning comes early, and the storm will leave much work in its wake." Mabel nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. "Good night, then." As she turned toward the bedroom, his voice stopped her. "Mabel." The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her. She looked back at him. "Thank you," he said simply, "for your trust." Words failed her, so she merely nodded before slipping into the bedroom, her heart beating a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. The storm lasted 3 days, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow across the valley. Nita and his men remained, helping clear paths to the barn and chicken coop, ensuring the livestock were fed and watered, and reinforcing the smaller outbuildings against the weight of the snow. Each night, Nita slept by the fire while his men stayed in the barn. Each morning, Mabel woke to find him already outside working before dawn. Each evening, after Emma was asleep, they talked by candlelight, tentative conversations at first, gradually growing more comfortable, more revealing. She told him about Boston, about her family's disappointment when she'd chosen to marry Thomas, about her early struggles adjusting to frontier life. He shared stories of Apache customs, taught her words in his language, explained how to read weather patterns in the clouds and animal behavior. On the 4th morning, the storm finally broke, revealing a crystalline blue sky and a transformed landscape glittering with snow. Nita's men prepared to depart for their winter camp, but Mabel noticed Nita himself made no move to join them. "You're not going with them?" she asked, as they watched the others ride away. "I thought I might stay," he said carefully, "to help with the remaining repairs, if that is acceptable." Something fluttered in her chest, hope mingled with apprehension. "It is," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Emma would miss you terribly if you left now." His eyes, warm and knowing, met hers. "Only Emma?" Heat rose to her cheeks. "The chickens, too, I imagine. They've grown quite fond of you." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Then I must stay. For Emma and the chickens. That evening, as Mabel prepared dinner, she felt Nita's eyes on her from where he sat teaching Emma to play a string game. The domesticity of the scene struck her with unexpected force. How quickly this man had become woven into the fabric of their daily lives, how naturally Emma had accepted his presence, how comfortably Mabel herself had grown to rely on his strength and quiet wisdom. It was dangerous, this tentative happiness. The world beyond their snow-covered valley would not look kindly on whatever was developing between them. Yet in that moment, with the warm glow of the fire illuminating their small cabin, Mabel allowed herself to imagine a future where such things didn't matter. Later, after Emma was asleep, Mabel brought out the bottle of whiskey Thomas had kept for special occasions. She poured a small amount for each of them, her hands trembling slightly. "To survived storms," she offered, raising her glass. Nita raised his in response. "And to those yet to come." The whiskey burned pleasantly down her throat, warming her from within. "Why did you really stay?" she asked, emboldened by the spirit. "The truth." Nita considered her for a long moment, then set his glass down deliberately. "Because when I am not here, I think of you," he said, his voice low and honest. "Because the thought of leaving and not seeing your face each morning sits like a stone in my chest." His candor took her breath away. "Nita, you do not need to say anything," he continued. "I know this is not simple. I know the world would not understand. But here in this place I have found something I did not expect to find again." "What?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "Peace," he said. Then, even more quietly, "hope." Mabel's heart pounded against her ribs. It was too soon after Thomas, too complicated by their different backgrounds, too fraught with potential consequences. Yet she couldn't deny the connection that had formed between them, a bond forged in shared work, mutual respect, and the quiet conversations that had revealed the depths of each other's character. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Of me?" His voice held no judgment. "No," she answered truthfully, "of what I feel when I'm with you." Nita reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, his hand covered hers, warm and calloused from work. "Fear is the shadow of a thing, not the thing itself," he said softly. "Look instead at what casts the shadow." Their fingers intertwined on the weathered tabletop, Apache and white, two worlds meeting in a simple, profound gesture. Neither spoke again that night, but something fundamental had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings too powerful to be contained by convention or caution. As Mabel lay awake in her bed later, listening to the occasional crackle of the fire in the other room, she realized that the winter that had threatened to destroy her might instead be offering an unexpected chance at happiness. The next morning, Mabel rose early and stepped outside to fetch water. The world was transformed by the storm, pristine white as far as the eye could see, the rising sun casting a rose-gold glow across the untouched snow. The beauty of it stole her breath. She was so captivated by the view that she didn't notice the patch of ice by the water trough. Her foot slipped, and she fell awkwardly, a sharp pain lancing through her ankle as she cried out. Nita appeared instantly, as though he'd been watching for her. He was at her side in moments, his strong hands gentle as they examined her ankle. "It is not broken," he pronounced after careful probing, "but badly twisted. You should not walk on it." Before she could protest, he scooped her into his arms as though she weighed nothing, carrying her back to the cabin. Emma was just waking, rubbing sleep from her eyes, as Nita placed Mabel carefully in the rocking chair by the fire. "Mama? What happened?" the child asked, alarmed. "I fell like a clumsy goose." Mabel tried to smile through the pain. "But I'll be fine. Just a twisted ankle." Nita was already gathering supplies, cold water, strips of cloth, and a jar of salve from his own pack. With practiced movements, he wrapped her ankle tightly, his touch both clinical and intimately gentle. "This will help with the swelling and pain," he explained, applying the pungent-smelling salve. "An old remedy. Rest today. No weight on it until tomorrow at least." Mabel felt useless and vulnerable. "The animals need tending, and Emma needs breakfast, and—" "I will care for the animals," Nita interrupted firmly. "And I believe Emma and I can manage breakfast." "Can't we?" He turned to the girl, who nodded eagerly, pleased to be included. For the rest of the day, Mabel watched as Nita and Emma worked together, feeding chickens, preparing simple meals, even attempting to darn one of Emma's stockings with comical results that left them all laughing. The easy companionship between them warmed her heart even as it awakened a bitter-sweet ache for what Thomas had missed in his daughter's life. By evening, the pain in her ankle had subsided to a dull throb, but Nita insisted she continue to rest. After Emma was asleep, he checked the bandage, his fingers skimming over her skin with a touch that could no longer be described as merely medicinal. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything today." His eyes met hers, dark and intense in the firelight. "You are not accustomed to accepting help, are you?" Mabel smiled ruefully. "Is it that obvious?" "You carry yourself as though the weight of the world rests on your shoulders alone," he observed. "There is strength in that, but also unnecessary suffering." "I've had to be strong," she replied. "For Emma, for myself." "Strength is not measured by how much weight you carry alone," Nita said, his hand still resting lightly on her ankle. "Sometimes it is measured by knowing when to share the burden." The wisdom in his words struck her deeply. How long had she been fighting to prove herself, to stand alone against the hardships of frontier life? How exhausted she was from that constant battle. Impulsively, she reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. Nita went still beneath her touch, his eyes never leaving hers. "What happens when the snow melts?" she whispered, giving voice to the fear that had been growing alongside her feelings for him. "When the world beyond this valley intrudes again?" "That depends," he replied, turning his face slightly to press a kiss against her palm, "on what you want to happen." The gesture, simple yet profound, broke something open inside her, a dam holding back emotions she'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Without stopping to think, Mabel leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. For one breathless moment, Nita remained motionless. Then his hand came up to cradle the back of her head, and he was kissing her back with a restrained passion that made her dizzy. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, his touch reverent, as though she were something precious he feared might shatter. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Mabel saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "I should not have done that," she whispered, though she felt no regret. "No," he agreed, a smile playing at his lips. "Though you should have done it days ago." A laugh escaped her, releasing weeks of tension. "You're rather sure of yourself, aren't you?" His expression grew serious. "I am sure only of what I feel, Mabel. The rest—" He gestured vaguely at the world beyond their cabin. "The rest we will face together if you wish it." The offer hung between them, a future neither had anticipated, fraught with challenges yet rich with possibility. Mabel thought of the long, lonely months after Thomas's death, of her determination to survive on her own, of her pride that had nearly cost them everything. And she thought of the man before her, who had respected her independence even while offering support, who had won her daughter's trust, who looked at her now with eyes that promised not rescue, but partnership. "I wish it," she said simply. Nita's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Carefully, mindful of her injured ankle, he drew her into his arms, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the steady rhythm of his heart. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle this time, blanketing their small corner of the world in silence. But inside the cabin, something new had bloomed, fragile as the first spring flower pushing through the snow, but just as determined to grow toward the light. Spring came to the New Mexico mountains in fits and starts, warm days followed by sudden freezes, brilliant sunshine giving way to late snowstorms. By March, however, the worst of winter had passed. The snow receded, revealing mud and the first tentative green shoots of new life. In the 3 months since Mabel's fall, Nita had become a fixture at the Donavan homestead. Though he occasionally returned to his people's camp to maintain his responsibilities as a leader, he spent most nights by the fire in Mabel's cabin, though as winter thawed into spring, he had gradually moved from the floor to her bed, their relationship evolving into something neither had expected, but both had come to cherish. Emma adored him, following him around the property as he taught her to identify animal tracks, to whistle through a blade of grass, to listen for approaching riders by pressing her ear to the ground. He treated the child with a patient tenderness that made Mabel's heart ache with gratitude and love. Love, The word she had been afraid to acknowledge even to herself for weeks had finally taken root, undeniable as the changing seasons. She loved him, his quiet strength, his wisdom, his respect for her independence even as he supported her, his gentle way with Emma, the passion he showed behind closed doors when they were alone. But as the snow melted, so too did their isolation. The first traders began to pass through the valley. Neighbors who had been snowed in for months ventured out to check on each other. The world beyond their small sanctuary was awakening, and with it came the realities they had temporarily escaped. "The Campbell family will visit tomorrow," Mabel mentioned one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Emma was already asleep inside, exhausted from a day spent helping Nita repair fences. Nita's expression remained neutral, but she felt him tense beside her. "I see. Sarah Campbell is my closest friend here," Mabel continued. "They have a farm about 10 miles east. Their son Richard is Emma's age. And they will not approve of finding me here," Nita stated matter-of-factly. Mabel couldn't deny it. John Campbell was known for his particular dislike of natives, having lost a brother in a raid years before. "They might not understand," she admitted. "Not at first." Nita took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Then I will go to my people tomorrow and return when they have left." "No," Mabel said firmly. "This is your home too now. I won't hide you away like some shameful secret." His eyes softened at her words. "This is not about shame, Mabel. It is about keeping peace. Some battles cannot be won through confrontation, and some must be faced head-on." She squeezed his hand. "I won't lie about who we are to each other, not anymore." The next morning, Mabel spent hours preparing for the Campbells' visit, baking bread, brewing coffee, tidying the cabin that now bore subtle signs of Nita's presence. A beaded leather pouch hanging by the door, hunting tools stored neatly in one corner, the small carved animals he made for Emma, arranged proudly on the mantel. Nita worked outside, deliberately visible as he repaired a wheel on the wagon. When the Campbells' wagon finally appeared on the horizon, Mabel took a deep breath, straightening her dress and touching the turquoise pendant Nita had given her for protection. The Campbells' reaction was as expected, initial shock giving way to tight-lipped disapproval, as Mabel introduced Nita not as a hired hand, but as her companion. Sarah's eyes widened, while John's face darkened with barely contained anger. Only little Richard seemed unaffected, immediately asking Emma to show him the new fox den she'd discovered near the creek. "Perhaps the children could play outside while we adults talk," Mabel suggested, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Once the children were gone, John Campbell wasted no time. "Have you lost your mind, Mabel?" he demanded. "Living under the same roof as a—" He bit off whatever slur he'd been about to use, casting a wary glance at Nita, who stood calmly by the fireplace. "Nita saved our lives this winter," Mabel replied evenly. "He repaired the roof, provided food, protected us from wolves." "I'm sure he did," John interrupted, his implication clear in his tone. "And now he's made himself quite at home, hasn't he?" "John," Sarah murmured, placing a restraining hand on her husband's arm. Nita spoke then, his voice calm and dignified. "I understand your concern, Mr. Campbell. You worry for Mabel's safety and reputation, but I assure you, my intentions are honorable." "Honorable," John scoffed. "Do you know what they'll say in town when they hear about this? A white widow living with an Apache. They'll run you both out of the territory." "John!" Sarah exclaimed, genuinely shocked by her husband's bluntness. "It's the truth," he insisted. "Mabel, think of your daughter. Think of what this means for her future." "I think of nothing but Emma's future," Mabel replied, her voice growing steely. "And I see a man who has shown her more kindness and taught her more about surviving in this land than anyone since her father died." "This isn't right," John muttered. "It's not natural." "What isn't natural," Nita said quietly, "is hatred taught so deeply that it blinds men to the humanity in others." For a moment, John looked as though he might lunge at Nita, but Sarah's grip on his arm tightened. "We should go," she said firmly. "The children—" "Wait," Mabel interrupted. "Please, Sarah, John, I know this is unexpected. I know it goes against everything you've been taught to believe. But I'm asking you as my friends to try to understand. Nita is a good man. He has been nothing but respectful and kind. And," she took a deep breath, "and I love him." The silence that followed her declaration was profound. John looked away, his jaw working. Sarah studied Mabel's face intently, searching for something. Doubt, perhaps, or fear. Finding neither, her expression softened slightly. "Are you sure about this, Mabel?" she asked quietly. "Truly sure." "I've never been more certain of anything," Mabel replied, meeting her friend's gaze steadily. Sarah nodded slowly, then turned to her husband. "John, we're leaving. Now." Her tone brooked no argument. As they gathered the children and prepared to depart, Sarah pulled Mabel aside. "I can't say I understand," she whispered, "but I've never seen you look so alive. Not even with Thomas." She squeezed Mabel's hands. "Be careful, though. Others won't be as willing to accept this as I might be." "Thank you," Mabel replied, tears stinging her eyes at this small gesture of understanding. As the Campbells' wagon disappeared down the trail, Nita came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," she answered, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Yes, I am." That night, as they lay entwined in bed, the spring wind rustling through the newly leafed cottonwoods outside, Mabel traced the contours of Nita's face in the moonlight. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "That I never expected this," she confessed. "Any of this. After Thomas died, I thought my life would be nothing but struggle and loneliness. And now, he prompted when she trailed off. "Now I'm afraid," she admitted, "not of what people like the Campbells think, but of how much I have to lose. How much we all have to lose." Nita gathered her closer. "The future is always uncertain, Mabel, but some things are worth the risk." She pressed her forehead to his, breathing in the scent of him, pine and smoke, and something uniquely his own. "I want to make this real," she whispered. "Not just here in our own world, but out there too. I want to face whatever comes together, properly." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You mean marriage?" "Yes," she replied simply. "If you want that too." Nita was quiet for a long moment, his expression solemn in the moonlight. "My people have a different way of binding lives together," he finally said. "Less formal than white customs, but no less sacred. And your people, they would not recognize a union between us." "I don't care what they recognize," Mabel insisted. "I only care what we recognize." A smile slowly spread across his face, the rare, unguarded smile she had come to treasure. "Then yes," he said, "I want to bind my life to yours in whatever way will bring you happiness." They sealed the promise with a kiss that deepened into something more urgent, their bodies speaking what words could not fully express. The devotion, the passion, the commitment to a shared future, despite the obstacles they knew lay ahead. The following weeks brought new life to the homestead. The garden Mabel planted thrived under Nita's care, his knowledge of the local growing conditions proving invaluable. The livestock grew healthy and strong. Emma blossomed like a wildflower, her natural curiosity nurtured by the combined wisdom of both Mabel and Nita. But with spring's renewal came increased contact with the outside world, and the reality of their unconventional situation could no longer be ignored. First came the whispers, carried back by Emma after a trip to the general store in the small settlement 10 miles away. "Why did those ladies stop talking when we came in, Mama?" she asked innocently. "And why did they look at us that way?" Then came the minister, riding out specifically to speak with Mabel about the disturbing rumors he'd heard. He left with a flea in his ear after Mabel firmly informed him that her spiritual welfare was her own concern, not his. Most troubling was the visit from a cavalry lieutenant and 2 soldiers, ostensibly checking on the welfare of settlers in the area, but clearly there to investigate reports of an Apache living with a white woman. Only Nita's official status as a scout for the army on occasion, vouched for by a captain at the nearest fort, prevented a more serious confrontation. "It will only get worse," Nita observed that evening, as they discussed the increasing pressure. "The more people who learn about us, the greater the danger." Mabel sat at the table, writing a letter to her sister in Boston, the first contact she'd attempted since Thomas's death. "I know," she acknowledged, "but I won't give in to their hatred." "It is not just hatred," Nita said carefully. "It is fear. Fear of what they do not understand, fear of change." He paused, choosing his next words with care. "And sometimes, Mabel, fear has power. the power to destroy. She looked up from her letter, seeing the concern etched in his features. What are you saying? I am saying that perhaps we should consider other options, other places where we might live in peace. You mean leave? The thought hadn't occurred to her. This land was Thomas's dream, her home, her future, or so she'd believed. There are places to the south in Mexico where mixed families live without the same prejudice we face here, Nita explained. Communities where Apache and Mexican and white settlers have learned to coexist. We could start fresh there, without the shadow of others' disapproval hanging over us. The suggestion was both terrifying and oddly liberating. To leave everything behind, the homestead she'd fought so hard to maintain, the last physical connection to Thomas, was a daunting prospect. Yet the idea of a place where their love wouldn't be condemned, where Emma could grow up without facing scorn for her mother's choices, held undeniable appeal. I need to think about it, Mabel finally said. This is a lot to consider. Nita nodded, understanding as always. There is no rush to decide, but it is good to know we have choices beyond simply enduring what comes. The next day brought an unexpected visitor, Sarah Campbell, riding alone on her bay mare, her expression troubled as she dismounted in the yard. Sarah, is everything all right? Mabel asked, wiping her hands on her apron as she came out to greet her friend. No, Sarah replied bluntly. No, it's not. I needed to warn you. She glanced around nervously. Is he here? Your Nita? He's hunting, Mabel answered, concern growing at Sarah's obvious distress. What's happened? Sarah took a deep breath. There's talk in town, bad talk. Some men are saying it's an affront to decency having a savage living with a white woman. They're talking about forming a party to run him off, or worse. Cold fear settled in Mabel's stomach. Who's behind this? Mason Rogers is stirring most of it up, Sarah said, naming a local rancher known for his violent temper and hatred of natives. But he's got others listening. Even John. She looked away, ashamed. John's been talking too after a few drinks. I've tried to make him see reason, but... When? Mabel asked, her mind racing. When are they planning this? Soon. Within the week, from what I gathered. Sarah gripped Mabel's hands tightly. You need to be careful. Or better yet, you need to leave. Just for a while until tempers cool. The warning confirmed everything Nita had feared. That night, when he returned with a brace of rabbits for their supper, Mabel relayed Sarah's message, watching his expression grow grave but not surprised. Then we must go, he said simply. Tomorrow, pack only what we need. So quickly. Despite having considered the possibility, the immediacy of it sent panic through her. Men like Rogers won't give warning before they come, Nita explained. And once they start down this path, bloodshed becomes too easy. Reality crashed down upon her. This wasn't just about disapproval or social ostracism anymore. This was about real physical danger. To Nita, to herself, to Emma. Where will we go? She asked, her decision made in that moment of clarity. South, he replied. To a place I know near the border. We'll travel at night at first, to avoid being seen. That night was a flurry of activity, sorting through possessions, deciding what could be carried, what must be left behind. Emma, sensing the gravity of the situation despite their attempts to frame it as an adventure, was unusually subdued as she carefully selected which toys would accompany them. Will we ever come back, Mama? She asked, as Mabel tucked her into bed for what might be the last time in the only home the child remembered. Mabel smoothed back her daughter's copper curls, so like her own. I don't know, sweetheart, she answered honestly, but home isn't just a place. It's the people you love, and we'll all be together. Even Nita. Emma's eyes were wide and serious in the lamplight. Especially Nita, Mabel assured her. He's family now. The child seemed to consider this, then nodded solemnly. Okay, as long as we're together. The simple wisdom of her daughter's acceptance brought tears to Mabel's eyes. That's right, she whispered. As long as we're together. As Emma drifted off to sleep, Mabel joined Nita outside where he was loading their wagon with supplies and the few possessions they couldn't bear to leave behind. Are you certain about this? He asked quietly, pausing in his work. Once we leave, there may be no coming back. Mabel looked around at the homestead she and Thomas had built, the cabin with its newly sound roof, the barn, the garden just beginning to flourish. So much work, So many dreams invested in this patch of earth. And yet, this land was Thomas's dream, she said slowly. Not mine. Not anymore. She turned to Nita, reaching for his hand. My dream is a life where we don't have to hide what we feel for each other, where Emma can grow up proud of her family, not ashamed. Nita's eyes shone with emotion in the moonlight. Then we will build that dream together, he promised, pulling her into his arms. A new beginning. As they held each other under the vast New Mexico sky, Mabel felt a strange mixture of grief and hope, mourning for what she was leaving behind, yet filled with anticipation for what lay ahead. The future was uncertain, fraught with challenges she could barely imagine, but one thing she knew with absolute certainty: wherever their journey led, they would face it together. Dawn was just breaking over the eastern mountains when they left the homestead behind. The wagon, loaded with their essential possessions, moved slowly down the trail that led south. Mabel sat at the reins with Emma beside her, while Nita rode ahead on his horse, scouting the path and watching for any sign of pursuit. They had left a letter for Sarah Campbell, explaining their departure and entrusting her with selling the property when possible and forwarding the money to a post office in Santa Fe. It was the only loose end Mabel couldn't bear to leave untied. The rest, the memories and dreams and years of work, she released with each mile that passed beneath the wagon wheels. Emma, initially excited by the adventure, soon grew tired and restless. "How much farther, Mama?" she asked for the third time that morning. "Many days yet, sweetheart," Mabel replied patiently. "Remember what Nita said about our journey being like the migration of the geese. Long but worthwhile." The child sighed dramatically, but settled back against the supplies. "I'm going to count all the rabbits I see," she declared, her resilience reasserting itself. Nita rode back to them around midday, his expression serious. "Riders coming from the north," he reported. 4 men moving fast. Fear clutched at Mabel's heart. "Rogers?" "I could not tell at this distance," Nita replied. "But we should leave the trail, find cover in case it is them." He led them off the main path into a dense stand of pinon pines, where they waited in tense silence, the wagon hidden by the trees. Emma, sensing their anxiety, clung to Mabel without asking questions. The sound of galloping horses reached them shortly after. Men riding hard, their voices carrying on the wind though the words were indistinct. They passed by without slowing, apparently unaware that their quarry had left the trail. "They're heading for the homestead," Mabel realized. "They don't know we've gone." "It gives us time," Nita agreed, "but we should avoid the main trails now. I know another way, longer but safer." The detour took them through rougher country, up narrow canyons, across dry washes, through stretches of land where the wagon nearly became stuck several times. By nightfall they were all exhausted, but Nita insisted they continue a few more miles before making camp. "The farther we are from known paths, the safer we will be," he explained. They camped that night in a protected hollow, building only a small fire that couldn't be seen from a distance. After Emma was asleep, wrapped in blankets in the back of the wagon, Mabel joined Nita where he sat, keeping watch. "Do you think they'll follow us?" she asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Eventually someone will realize we've fled," he replied honestly, "but they won't know which direction we've taken. And with each day, the trail grows colder." Mabel stared into the dying embers of their fire. "I keep thinking about everything we left behind, all of Thomas's work, all of my work. You regret leaving?" His question held no judgment, only a desire to understand. "No," she said after a moment's reflection. "No, I don't regret it. It's strange. A week ago, I couldn't imagine leaving that place. Now I can't imagine going back." Nita's arm tightened around her. "Life changes in an instant sometimes, like the sudden storms of summer that change the course of rivers." The poetry of his observation made her smile despite her weariness. "How do you always find the right words?" "I speak only what I see," he replied simply. "And what I see now is a woman of remarkable courage, facing a new future without fear." "Oh, I have fear," she admitted with a soft laugh. "Plenty of it, but I've learned that fear doesn't have to stop you. Sometimes it can even push you forward, toward something better." Nita's smile was visible in the faint glow of the fire's remains. That is wisdom many never learn in a lifetime. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through the junipers. the occasional rustling of small nocturnal creatures. "Tell me about this place we're going," Mabel finally said. "What awaits us there?" "It is called Arroyo Seco," Nita replied, his voice taking on the cadence it always did when he shared stories. "A small settlement near the border where the mountains meet the desert. The people there are a mixture: Mexican farmers, a few Apache families who chose to settle rather than continue the old nomadic ways, even some white settlers who, for various reasons, prefer to live away from American territories. And they coexist peacefully, not without occasional conflict," he acknowledged, "but with more tolerance than you would find elsewhere. There is a philosophy there that all who come seeking peace should be granted the chance to build a life, regardless of their origins." "It sounds almost too good to be true," Mabel mused. "It is not perfect," Nita cautioned. "Life there is hard in different ways. The land is drier, water more precious. Bandits sometimes raid from across the border. But there is a freedom there that cannot be found in places where old hatreds rule. And you have friends there, connections." Nita nodded. "My mother's cousin settled there years ago. He married a Mexican woman, has children now. Last I heard, he had a small ranch where he raises horses." The mention of family made Mabel realize how little she knew about Nita's past. He rarely spoke of his childhood or his life before their meeting. "Will your people, your Apache community, will they understand why you've left with us?" A shadow crossed his face. "Some will. Others will see it as the final step away from the old ways." He was quiet for a moment. "I have lived between worlds for many years, Mabel. Never fully accepted by whites, increasingly separate from my own people as their traditions change or fade. With you and Emma, I have found a place where I belong completely." The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. She turned in his arms, framing his face with her hands. "I love you," she said softly. "Whatever comes, whatever awaits us, know that I have never been more certain of anything than I am of that." His response was to kiss her, tenderly at first, then with growing passion that spoke of all they had risked and all they had found in each other. Later, as they lay together beneath the blanket of stars, Mabel thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. From Boston to the New Mexico territory, from Thomas's wife to widow to Nita's partner, from a life constrained by others' expectations to one defined by her own choices, however difficult they might be. "We should sleep," Nita murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her arm. "The journey tomorrow will be long." But Mabel wasn't ready for the moment to end. "Tell me a story first," she requested. "An Apache story." He smiled in the darkness. "What kind of story would you like to hear?" "One about new beginnings," she replied. "About finding hope after loss." So he told her the tale of First Woman, who created the world anew after great destruction, planting seeds of beauty and harmony where only chaos had existed before. His voice, low and melodic, wrapped around her like a blanket as the stars wheeled overhead and the night creatures sang their desert symphony. Mabel fell asleep with the story in her heart, dreaming of seeds taking root in new soil, of flowers blooming in unexpected places. The journey south took nearly 2 weeks, longer than expected due to their need to avoid main routes and settlements. They encountered few people, an occasional trader, a family of Mexican farmers moving north, a lone prospector searching for silver in the hills. None seemed particularly interested in a small family traveling south, for which Mabel was profoundly grateful. Emma proved remarkably adaptable, turning the hardships of travel into games and adventures. She collected interesting rocks and feathers, learned Spanish words from Nita, and kept a detailed count of all the animals they spotted along the way. Her natural resilience was a constant reminder to Mabel of why they had undertaken this journey, to secure a future where Emma could grow up free from the prejudice and limitations they'd left behind. As they traveled further south, the landscape changed. The pinyon juniper forests giving way to more arid terrain, the mountains becoming rockier and more dramatic. The heat increased as they descended in elevation, making afternoon travel difficult and forcing them to move primarily in the cooler hours of morning and evening. "We are getting close," Nita announced one dawn as they broke camp. "Perhaps 2 more days if all goes well." Mabel felt a mixture of relief and anxiety at the news. The journey had been exhausting, but at least its challenges were known. What awaited them in Arroyo Seco remained a mystery. Would they truly find acceptance there? Could they build the life they envisioned? The following afternoon, as they crested a ridge, Nita reined in his horse, waiting for the wagon to catch up. When Mabel and Emma reached him, he pointed to the valley below. Arroyo Seco, he said simply. The settlement was smaller than Mabel had imagined, perhaps 20 structures clustered around a central plaza, with scattered homesteads visible in the surrounding countryside. A creek lined with cottonwoods cut through the valley, providing precious water in this arid landscape. Fields of corn and beans spread out from the creek banks, along with small orchards of what appeared to be apple and peach trees. "It's so small," Mabel observed, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. "Small, yes," Nita agreed, "but good people, and room to grow." They made their final camp that night within sight of the settlement, planning to arrive the following morning. As they sat by the fire, Mabel found herself unusually quiet, the reality of their situation finally sinking in completely. "What troubles you?" Nita asked, always attuned to her moods. "What if they don't accept us?" She finally voiced her deepest fear. "What if we've come all this way only to find the same prejudice in different form?" "Then we will continue on," he replied with simple certainty, "until we find a place that does accept us, or we will make our own place, away from all others if necessary." He took her hand, his touch reassuring. "But I believe Arroyo Seco will welcome us if we approach with open hearts and willingness to contribute." His confidence steadied her, as it always did. "I trust you," she said softly, "and I'm ready for whatever comes, as long as we face it together." The next morning they entered Arroyo Seco just as the town was coming to life. Children played in the dusty streets, women gathered at the communal well, men prepared for the day's work in fields or shops. Activity paused momentarily as the newcomers passed, curious eyes following their progress, but there was none of the open hostility Mabel had feared. Nita led them through the small settlement, to a modest adobe house on its outskirts. An older man was in the yard, repairing a saddle. He looked up as they approached, his weathered face registering first confusion, then recognition. "Nita," he called in Spanish, setting aside his work. "Eres tú?" "Miguel," Nita replied, dismounting and embracing the man with genuine affection. "It has been too long." Rapid Spanish followed, too quick for Mabel to follow with her limited knowledge of the language. She caught her name and Emma's, understanding that Nita was explaining their presence and situation. Miguel's gaze turned to her, assessing but not unkind. He switched to accented but clear English. "My cousin says you have traveled far seeking a new beginning, that you have left much behind to be together." Mabel nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to speak past the lump in her throat. Miguel's face softened. "Then you are welcome here. My home is your home until you can establish your own." Just like that. Acceptance. No judgment, no suspicion, only the simple hospitality of a place where such unions, while perhaps uncommon, were not seen as abominations. A woman appeared in the doorway of the house, Miguel's wife Rosa, as they soon learned. She took one look at the dust-covered travelers, particularly Emma, whose exhaustion was evident, and immediately began issuing gentle orders. Within an hour, they had been fed, shown to a small but clean room where they could rest, and made to feel genuinely welcome. That evening, as Emma slept deeply for the first time in weeks, Mabel and Nita sat with their hosts in the courtyard behind the house. The night was warm, stars brilliant above them, the scent of Rosa's herb garden perfuming the air. "There is land available to the east of town," Miguel was saying. "Good water access, suitable for growing or raising livestock. The previous owner returned to Mexico last year, and no one has claimed it." "How much?" Mabel asked, practical concerns foremost in her mind, despite their warm welcome. Miguel and Rosa exchanged a glance. "Here, land is often earned rather than purchased," Rosa explained. "If the town council agrees, you may claim it and pay with improvements and contribution to the community. We need a good healer. Are you skilled with herbs or midwifery?" Mabel shook her head. "I'm afraid not, but I can sew, keep accounts, teach children to read and write in English." Rosa's eyes lit up. "A teacher, even better. Many families here wish their children to learn English, to better navigate the changing world." "And I can work with horses," Nita added, "or help with the harvest, construction, hunting, whatever is needed." Miguel nodded approvingly. "You will find your place here. It may not be easy at first. Newcomers must prove themselves, but you will be judged by your actions, not by who you love. The simple statement brought tears to Mabel's eyes. After months of hiding, of facing disapproval and danger, the acceptance felt almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything." Later, in the privacy of their small room, Mabel turned to Nita, overcome with emotion. "Is this real?" she whispered. "Can it truly be this simple?" "Not simple," he corrected gently. "The work ahead will be hard. Building a home, establishing ourselves in the community. These things take time and effort, but here at least we can do it openly without fear." She leaned into his embrace, exhaustion and relief washing over her in equal measure. "I never imagined feeling this free." "This is only the beginning," Nita murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The first day of our new life." In the weeks that followed, Mabel discovered that Nita had been right. Life in Arroyo Seco was not easy, but it offered possibilities they had never dared hope for in the territory they'd left behind. The town council, impressed by Mabel's education and Nita's skills, granted them the abandoned homestead Miguel had mentioned. The small adobe house needed extensive repairs, but the land was good, with fertile soil along the creek and ample grazing for the few animals they'd brought with them. Emma quickly made friends with the local children, her natural charm and curiosity transcending language barriers. Within a month, she was chattering in a mixture of English and Spanish, bringing home new words and customs that delighted her mother. Mabel began teaching English lessons 3 afternoons a week in the town's small church, while Nita found work breaking horses for local ranchers and serving as a guide for travelers navigating the dangerous border regions. Their skills were valued, their presence increasingly accepted as part of the community fabric. There were challenges, of course. Some of the more traditional Mexican families maintained a certain distance, particularly the older generation who viewed their unconventional union with quiet disapproval. Water rights were a constant source of tension in the arid region, requiring careful negotiation and compromise, and occasionally outsiders passing through would stare or make comments, reminded Mabel that the world beyond their small haven remained largely unchanged. But these were manageable problems, not existential threats. For the first time since Thomas's death, perhaps if she was honest with herself, for the first time since leaving Boston, Mabel felt truly at peace. 1 year after their arrival in Arroyo Seco, Mabel stood in the doorway of their home, watching the sunset paint the western mountains gold and crimson. Their house was transformed, the roof repaired, walls freshly plastered, windows added to bring light into previously dark rooms. The garden behind the house flourished with vegetables, herbs, and flowers, while a small orchard of young fruit trees promised future abundance. Emma's voice drifted from the nearby creek, where she was helping Nita set fish traps for their dinner. At 7, she had grown taller and more confident, her skin bronzed by the New Mexico sun, her Spanish now as fluent as her English. She adored Nita, following him everywhere, absorbing his knowledge of the land and its creatures with eager enthusiasm. Mabel's hand drifted to her stomach, where the first subtle swelling of new life was beginning to show. They had learned of the pregnancy 2 months earlier, and the news had been met with quiet joy by both of them. A child of their union, a physical manifestation of the love that had brought them to this place, that had sustained them through hardship and change. In the community's eyes, they were already considered married, having undergone a simple blessing ceremony performed by Miguel shortly after their arrival. It wasn't legally recognized by American law, but here, in this place between nations and cultures, it was sufficient. They were family in all the ways that mattered. Nita approached from the creek, Emma riding on his shoulders, both of them laughing about something. The sight filled Mabel's heart to overflowing. This man who had once been a stranger, now the center of their world, her partner in every sense. "The traps are set," he announced as they reached her. "We should have fish for breakfast." "Good," Mabel replied with a smile. "The baby seems particularly hungry today." Nita's expression softened, as it always did at mention of the child. He helped Emma down from his shoulders, then placed a gentle hand on Mabel's growing belly. "Growing strong already," he said with pride, "like its mother." Emma placed her small hand beside his. "I want a sister," she declared, "not for the first time, so I can teach her everything I know." "We'll see what the Creator sends us," Nita replied, using the phrase Mabel had come to understand, reflected his belief in accepting what life offered rather than demanding specific outcomes. That night, after Emma was asleep, they sat together on the small porch Nita had built the previous summer. The night was warm, filled with the scent of sage and the rhythmic chirping of crickets. In the distance, coyotes called to one another across the valley, their voices rising and falling in ancient conversation. "I received a letter today," Mabel said, breaking their comfortable silence. "From Sarah Campbell." Nita turned to her with interest. "What news does she bring?" "She's sold the homestead finally. She's forwarding the money to us." Mabel paused, sorting through her feelings about this final severance from her past life. "She also says there's been talk of organizing the territory into a state soon. Things are changing there." "As they change everywhere," Nita observed. "Does she mention if anyone still speaks of us?" "Only that the story has grown with each telling," Mabel replied with a small smile. "Apparently I was either kidnapped by a savage Apache or enchanted by dark magic, depending on who's telling the tale." Nita's laugh was low and warm. "And which is true, do you think?" "Oh, definitely the dark magic," she teased, leaning against his shoulder. "How else could I explain being so happy? So far from everything I once thought I needed." He wrapped his arm around her, his hand coming to rest protectively over where their child grew. "Not magic," he corrected. "Courage. The courage to follow your heart even when the path led away from what was familiar." Mabel considered this, watching the stars emerge one by one in the deepening twilight. "I think it was something even simpler," she finally said. "Love, not just between us, but love for Emma, love for the possibility of a different kind of life, love strong enough to overcome fear." "Ah," Nita murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Now, who is the poet?" She smiled, content in his embrace. "I had a good teacher." They sat in silence then, two people from different worlds who had created their own, shared world against all odds. Behind them, their home stood solid and welcoming. Before them stretched the valley of Arroyo Seco, the community that had accepted them, the land that had offered them refuge. And within her grew the future, a child who would be both a bridge between cultures and a testament to the power of love to transcend boundaries. The night deepened around them, peaceful and promising. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, the continuing work of building a life, raising children, becoming ever more entwined with this place and its people. But tonight, in this moment, Mabel knew with absolute certainty that they had found what they sought. Not perfection, but possibility. Not escape, but belonging. A new beginning, hard-won, but infinitely precious. 5 years later. The classroom buzzed with the energy of 20 children finishing their English lessons for the day. Mabel moved between the tables, offering encouragement and corrections as the students practiced writing their names and simple phrases. At 12, Emma was now her assistant, helping the younger children with patience beyond her years. Her copper hair was braided in the Apache style Nita had taught her, complementing her features that somehow managed to honor both her Irish heritage and her deep connection to this southwestern land. "Maestra," called a small voice. "Is this correct?" Mabel bent to examine the careful lettering of 6-year-old Juanita. "Perfect," she praised. "Your writing improves every day." The little girl beamed with pride, reminding Mabel so much of her own daughter at that age, eager to learn, to please, to grow. As the children gathered their slates and books, preparing to leave, Mabel glanced out the window to see Nita approaching, their 4-year-old son Tomás riding on his shoulders, while their infant daughter Esperanza was cradled securely in his arms. The sight never failed to fill her with profound gratitude. 5 years in Arroyo Seco had transformed them all. Nita, once solitary and caught between worlds, now moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had found his place. The lines of tension she remembered from their early days together had softened, replaced by laugh lines at the corners of his eyes. The community had changed as well. What had begun as grudging acceptance had evolved into genuine integration. Their family was no longer viewed as an oddity, but as an essential thread in the fabric of Arroyo Seco. Mabel's school had expanded, now serving not only local children, but also adults eager to learn English for trade purposes. Nita's knowledge of both Apache ways and frontier skills had made him an invaluable member of the town council. As the last student left, Emma hurried to greet her father and siblings. Tomás immediately demanded to be transferred to his sister's care, while Esperanza, just 3 months old, remained contentedly in Nita's arms, her dark eyes, so like her father's, taking in the world with calm curiosity. "How were the lessons today?" Nita asked, stepping into the classroom and bending to kiss Mabel lightly. "Wonderful," she replied. "Pablo finally mastered his letters, and Elena is already reading simple stories." The pride in her voice was evident. The school had become her passion, a way to bridge cultures just as their family did. Many of her former students had gone on to find opportunities in larger towns, or even as far as Santa Fe, carrying with them not only language skills, but also the example of how different traditions could coexist and enrich one another. "And how was the council meeting?" she asked, as they gathered their belongings, preparing to walk home. "Productive," Nita replied. "The irrigation project is finally approved. It will mean more water for the eastern fields next spring." The project had been his initiative, drawing on traditional Apache water management techniques combined with Spanish engineering principles. Like so much in their lives, it represented the best of both worlds brought together in harmony. As they walked home through the town square, they exchanged greetings with neighbors and friends. Miguel and Rosa waved from their doorway, now grandparents many times over, and honorary abuelos to Mabel and Nita's children. The blacksmith called out an invitation to Sunday dinner that Nita accepted with a nod. Children ran past playing a game that mixed American baseball with traditional Mexican challenges. This was the world they had created, not perfect, still subject to the hardships of frontier life and occasional friction between different customs, but a world where their family could thrive without hiding who they were. Their home came into view as they rounded the bend in the road. The adobe walls now expanded to accommodate their growing family, the garden lush with late summer produce, the corral holding the horses Nita bred and trained with such skill that buyers came from as far as El Paso. "Race you to the gate," Emma challenged her brother, who immediately scrambled down from her back and took off running, his delighted squeals carrying on the warm afternoon air. "Careful," Mabel called automatically, though she had long since accepted that scrapes and tumbles were an inevitable part of childhood in this rugged land. Nita adjusted the sleeping Esperanza in his arms, his free hand finding Mabel's as they watched their older children dash ahead. "Happy?" he asked simply, a question he still posed occasionally, as though marveling at the life they had built from such unlikely beginnings. Mabel squeezed his hand, the years of shared labor, love and growth between them, a bond stronger than she had ever imagined possible. "Beyond words," she replied, and it was true. The journey that had begun on that snowy day, when he had first appeared at her failing homestead, had led them through hardship and danger to this place of belonging. From the moment he had warned, "Defy me again and I'll never let you leave," their lives had been intertwined in ways neither could have foreseen, not as captive and captor, but as equals choosing each other day after day, year after year. As they approached their home, where the afternoon light gilded the simple structure with momentary splendor, Mabel reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought them here. The young Boston woman she had once been would never have imagined this life, these children, this man, this remote community where cultures blended and traditional boundaries blurred. Yet she couldn't imagine wanting any other existence. Here, in this dusty corner of the world, she had found not just survival but fulfillment, not just acceptance but celebration, not just love, but a legacy that would continue in their children, who moved easily between worlds carrying the best of both into a future bright with possibility. "Come," Nita said, interrupting her reflections. "The evening meal won't prepare itself." Mabel smiled, returning to the present moment, to her family, her home, her life rich with meaning and purpose. "I'm coming," she replied, stepping forward into the warmth of belonging. Into the future they continued to build together, one day at a time. The end. Dear listener, if today felt a little quieter, if your memories felt heavy, or your body asked more than your heart wanted to give, take a deep breath. You've made it this far, with courage, with grace, with a heart that still knows how to love, even after loss. Remember this, you are a home all on your own. Every line on your face carries a story. Every silence holds a victory. And every sunrise is still a new beginning, no matter your age. Life still has gentle surprises waiting, sometimes in the shape of a sunset, a kind word, or a quiet story that arrives at just the right moment. Tonight, rest easy. May your dreams be calm, your mind feel light, and a quiet shield of protection surround your home. And when morning comes, may you rise with warmth in your chest and the quiet knowing that your time still blooms, even on cloudy days. With all our gratitude. Wild West Whispers team, thank you for staying with us until the end. We hope this story wrapped your heart in warmth, just as Mabel and Nita found warmth in each other during the coldest of winters. If you felt moved by their journey, their courage, their quiet love, and the family they built, please consider subscribing to our channel, giving this video a like, leaving us a comment, or sharing it with someone you care about. Your support means the world to us. It's what keeps us motivated to continue bringing you stories filled with love, redemption, and powerful twists that echo through time. And remember, at the very end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another story from our channel. Click to be surprised and inspired by more unforgettable tales like this one. Thank you for being here. Wild West Whispers team.